The restaurant gleamed like it had been carved from glass and gold. Crystal chandeliers scattered soft light across the polished marble floors, reflecting in the polished silverware and the delicate curves of the wine glasses. The quiet murmur of conversations was punctuated by the occasional clink of cutlery or soft laughter, but for me it all faded into the background. I felt every eye in our party, or so it seemed, on me. We were there to celebrate my mother's birthday, a tradition she had maintained for as long as I could remember. But tonight felt different. Tonight, my mother's eyes lingered on me longer than usual, her smile brighter, her gestures almost theatrical. I shifted in my seat, suddenly aware of the expensive silk of my dress, the tightness of my nerves, and the weight of her gaze. My sister, ever the picture of effortless beauty, leaned back in her chair with a glass of champagne in hand, smirking just slightly, though she claimed the air of nonchalance. Her smirk was subtle, the kind that could easily be dismissed by anyone else, but I knew it meant something. As the appetizers were served, Mom tapped her glass gently, drawing everyone's attention. The chatter in the room softened, and I felt my heart rate spike. She raised her glass again, her eyes glinting with pride, and then she said it, words that seemed to echo both in the room and inside my chest. "She's the daughter I'm proud of." For a moment, time froze. The words were warm and golden, a public acknowledgement of the countless sacrifices I had made. The late nights helping with my schoolwork, the quiet years spent keeping the house together, the invisible labor of always trying to be perfect. My chest swelled, tears threatening to rise, but I forced them back. The silence that followed my mother's toast was heavy, almost unbearable. Then I felt it, the sharp, familiar sting of my sister's gaze. She didn't frown, didn't hide it, just that slow, confident smirk that said more than words ever could. It was the look I had seen 100 times before, the one that silently said, "You'll never truly shine," not in her eyes, not in anyone's. My stomach tightened. Pride and embarrassment mingled in a strange cocktail that made my hands tremble just slightly against my napkin. We chatted, we laughed, and I tried to settle the turmoil in my chest. The waiters moved around us with practiced ease, but my mind was elsewhere. I kept stealing glances at my sister, how she played with her glass, how she leaned casually back in her chair, how she seemed to own the space just by existing. The way she did everything effortlessly, while I had to fight for acknowledgement in every corner of my life. Then it happened. The waiter arrived with the main course, placing a heavy envelope before me with a thud that made my heart skip. I looked down and froze. My eyes widened as I read the number scrawled neatly on the bill: $3,450, $3,450. My mother gasped lightly, my father's jaw tightened, and all the subtle chatter in the restaurant seemed to evaporate into a deafening silence. Every head at our table, every eye in the immediate vicinity, felt like it was on me, judging me, weighing me. My sister's smirk widened just slightly, that quiet, dangerous smirk that seemed to say, "Now we see who you really are." I felt a flush of heat rise in my cheeks, not embarrassment exactly, but anger, humiliation, and disbelief mingled into one heavy, pulsing sensation. It wasn't just the bill, it was the statement, the public declaration that I, the one my mother had just praised, was somehow the one to bear the impossible weight of this extravagant indulgence. I took a deep breath, sliding the envelope back just slightly across the table, feeling the room's silence grow heavier. The waiters paused. My mother blinked, confused. My sister leaned forward, eyes glittering, lips curved in satisfaction. In that moment, I realized that this evening, this toast, and this bill were more than just words and numbers. They were a test, and I had just been handed the first move. The silence in the restaurant was suffocating. It wasn't just quiet, it was the kind of quiet that presses down on your chest, makes your ears ring, and magnifies every heartbeat. I stared at the bill, my fingers brushing the edge of the thick envelope, feeling the weight of it physically and symbolically. $3,450. Numbers like that could make anyone falter, but what stung more was the weight of expectation, the judgment lurking behind every gaze. My mother's eyes were wide, uncertain, flicking between me and my sister. For a fleeting second, I saw a shadow of worry cross her usually confident face. My father's hand hovered over his wine glass, frozen mid-air, as if even the simple act of picking it up could betray some secret judgment. And then there was my sister, the ever-composed predator, watching with the tiniest trace of delight. That smirk, that impossible, calm, self-satisfied smirk that felt like it had been carved into her face just to torture me. I felt the heat of every stare, every expectation, every thought that they might all be silently asking, "Will she pay it? Can she?" I clenched my jaw, my pulse hammering in my temples. It wasn't just a bill, it was a challenge, a public test of who I was in this family, who I could be when under pressure. And I realized, in that tense, frozen moment, that I wasn't going to let anyone define me by the weight of a number on a piece of paper. Slowly, deliberately, I slid the envelope back toward the waiter. Not angrily, not impulsively, just back with calm precision, as if the action itself were speaking louder than any words could. The movement was measured, almost elegant, but it carried the force of a quiet rebellion. Every head at the table turned sharper toward me, mouths opening slightly as though trying to form words, but none came. Even nearby tables had paused mid-conversation, their attention stolen by the ripple of tension radiating from our corner. My mother's eyebrows knitted together. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice a careful mix of shock and disbelief. I met her gaze steadily, refusing to flinch. "Yes," I said softly, but with enough firmness that the words landed like stones. There was no hesitation, no apology, no attempt to soften the action. I wasn't just refusing the bill, I was refusing to be defined, humiliated, or trapped by anyone's expectations tonight. My sister leaned forward slightly, as though trying to whisper some cutting remark or make me falter. But she didn't need words. Her eyes alone said everything. "Do you really think you can pull this off? Do you think I'll let you look like the winner here?" The room seemed to shrink around us, the air thick with unspoken accusations and silent judgment. For a moment, I felt the familiar sting of old wounds, the childhood comparisons, the subtle favoritism, the constant need to prove myself while my sister seemed to float above it all. I could almost hear the echoes of every time I had been overlooked, every time I had been underestimated, and in that hot, tense moment, a quiet resolve formed in my chest. This wasn't just embarrassment. This wasn't just a ridiculous, overpriced bill. This was an opportunity. The waiter's hand hovered awkwardly, unsure what to do with the envelope now. My mother looked between us, then down at the table. My sister's smirk faltered for the briefest second, but then returned, sharper and more calculating. Everyone was waiting for someone to break the silence, to act first. And in that pause, heavy with anticipation, I realized something crucial. I didn't need to rush. I didn't need to apologize. I didn't need anyone's permission to claim this small, quiet victory. I sat back slightly, letting my decision settle like stone in the middle of the table. The room stayed silent, but I could feel a shift. This was no longer just a dinner. It was the beginning of something much larger, a test of pride, patience, and power. And I was determined to come out on top, one careful, deliberate move at a time. The drive home felt longer than usual, though the streets were quiet and empty. The city lights blurred past the window as my thoughts churned, each one sharper than the last. The dinner, the toast, the bill, it wasn't just an event anymore. It was a reminder of how the world could twist appearances, how people could wield privilege like a weapon, and how easily someone else could turn a celebration into a public trial. I felt anger simmering beneath my skin, but it wasn't the raw, reckless kind of anger that demanded immediate action. No, this was something slower, something patient and deliberate. Once I stepped inside the house, I dropped my coat and leaned against the door, closing my eyes. The quiet hum of the house did nothing to calm me. My mother's proud words replayed in my mind, warming and cruel all at once. My sister's smirk haunted me, the way she seemed untouchable, untethered by responsibility, her confidence sharpened by my discomfort. I ran a hand through my hair, letting the frustration rise, then fall, then reshape itself into something useful. I realized the situation had given me an unexpected gift: clarity. I didn't want petty revenge or to lash out in anger. I wanted precision. I wanted her to understand, in the smallest public detail, that privilege and arrogance didn't make her better, that attention and favor didn't always equate to respect. And most of all, I wanted to prove that my value wasn't tied to applause, money, or her smug amusement. My mind began turning over every dinner, every party, every moment she had outshone me effortlessly in front of family or friends. There was opportunity here. I just had to be smart. I started by cataloging her patterns, mentally noting everything she relied on: charm, effortless beauty, the way she could twist people into believing she was the center of everything, the small manipulations she performed without a second thought. Then I compared it to my strengths: diligence, consistency, thoughtfulness, and the quiet loyalty of the people around her who respected me deeply. I realized that while she relied on spectacle, I could rely on subtlety, timing, and strategy. If I played it right, I could expose her carefully, like a magician revealing the secret behind a trick. The plan began to take shape: small, deliberate moves that wouldn't appear as attacks but as natural outcomes of her own behavior. I imagined her at the next social gathering, a scenario I had already anticipated. Her charm would falter, her arrogance would be highlighted, and the people she sought to impress would begin to notice cracks she had never shown before. I could do it without confrontation, without shame, without even raising my voice. My revenge would be elegant, almost invisible, like a shadow moving through a room until it was too late for her to regain control. I smiled faintly, the first real sense of satisfaction I had felt all night. This wasn't about the bill anymore. It wasn't about embarrassment or a single evening. It was about balance, about restoring what had been quietly stolen from me over the years: dignity, recognition, and the subtle power of being underestimated. She had underestimated me her whole life. That would be her downfall. I began drafting mental scenarios, considering social events, family gatherings, and even casual conversations where her overconfidence could be turned into a public misstep. Every detail mattered: timing, witnesses, subtle wording, gestures. The more I planned, the more the tension in my chest eased. Anger transformed into focus, humiliation transformed into strategy. I wasn't just plotting revenge, I was reclaiming my identity. I was proving, to myself first and everyone else second, that recognition wasn't given by favoritism or flashy displays. It was earned carefully, deliberately, and intelligently. By the time I went to bed, my mind was buzzing, but my heart felt lighter. I wasn't just a daughter praised in passing, I was someone who could shape outcomes, control narratives, and claim respect quietly, without spectacle. Tomorrow, I realized, I would begin the first step of my plan. And when it unfolded perfectly, when my sister's carefully constructed image cracked just enough, everyone would finally see what I already knew: that true strength wasn't loud, visible, or showy. It was patient, precise, and impossible to ignore. When it finally revealed itself, the next family gathering was set in a sunlit country club, a sprawling estate of manicured gardens and sparkling fountains. Everything looked perfect on the surface: polished silverware, crystal glasses, laughter spilling like champagne, but beneath the perfection I carried a quiet anticipation, a sense of control I had never felt at these events before. My sister arrived, as always radiant in designer clothes and effortless charm, gliding across the room with the confidence of someone who assumed she owned the space. But this time, I wasn't watching her from the shadows, I was part of the scene, a deliberate actor in my own play. I greeted family and acquaintances with warmth, subtly steering conversations toward subjects where her knowledge was shallow, her attention span short, her ego fragile. People laughed at her small missteps lightly at first, then with increasing amusement as she tried to correct herself. I noticed the small shifts: the quick glance toward me, the faint tightening around her eyes, the barely audible sigh she couldn't hide. My plan was working. Dinner arrived, and as people settled into polite conversation, I watched her start to falter. She tried to regain the spotlight, telling an exaggerated story of a recent trip, but I had already planted questions beforehand with friends and cousins that gently highlighted inconsistencies. Each slip was minor, almost imperceptible, but in the refined, watchful atmosphere they carried weight. Laughter rose in the room, not mocking but knowing, appreciative of wit and subtle intelligence. Her composure began to crumble, ever so slightly. I remained calm, smiling politely, saying the right things at the right time, letting her missteps speak for themselves. My mother, who had once praised me in a fleeting toast, now looked at me differently. I caught her eyes across the table and I saw recognition, not just admiration, but respect for the quiet strength I had always carried. My sister, meanwhile, was losing the narrative she had always controlled so effortlessly. The room, once her stage, had shifted subtly, naturally into mine. By dessert, the transformation was undeniable. The people who had once hung on my sister's every word now turned to me for insight, for guidance, for humor. She smiled, but it was tight, forced, an echo of the self-assurance she had always relied upon. I could feel the satisfaction rising within me, not the childish thrill of revenge, but the deep, fulfilling clarity of justice served with precision. She had underestimated me, and she was paying for it without me ever raising my voice. Finally, as the meal drew to a close, my mother leaned slightly toward me, her voice soft and private. "You handled that beautifully," she said, pride and surprise mingling in her tone. For a fleeting moment, I thought about the extravagant toast, the bill, the smirk across the table that had haunted me for months. But this time it was different. I didn't feel embarrassment. I didn't feel anger. I felt a quiet triumph, the kind that comes from knowing you had chosen every word, every glance, every action carefully, and had emerged unshaken and respected. My sister excused herself abruptly after dessert, the graceful exit she usually commanded now tinged with the faint weight of defeat. I caught her eye as she passed, and for the first time, there was a flicker of acknowledgement, a silent recognition that her effortless control had been challenged, and that I had matched her, step for step, without losing dignity. As the evening ended and guests began to leave, I stepped outside into the cool night air. The stars were bright over the manicured gardens, and the soft hum of distant traffic reminded me that the world continued beyond these moments of family drama. I inhaled deeply, letting the night settle over me like a cloak. I had claimed my respect, my position, and my peace, not through spectacle or confrontation, but through patience, strategy, and integrity. In that moment, I realized the truth I had long ignored: recognition and power weren't always loud or visible. Sometimes they were quiet, careful, and invisible until they were undeniable. And tonight, they were undeniably mine.